Hello everybody, I am Ben from Team Panic, and today we're going to talk about what happened when I took two featherweights over to ICRA and competed in the Robo Wars Australia featherweight sportsman event. So I took over Strange Young Man, whose head is currently in my hands, and Video Game Violence, the robot that we made out of an Xbox literally last week. So what we're going to do today, before we quite jump into all of this, I've got a quick couple of points to make first. So first is a huge thank you to Shane, who took all of the footage that you're about to see, or at least 90% of that. I will leave a link to his Facebook page where he's got more photos and footage and stuff of his own down in the description below, so do go check him out. And secondly, we're going to do a slightly different catch-up on the whole thing this time round. I'm going to talk a little bit about what happened kind of before fights and after fights, but the actual fights themselves, I'm going to give you the raw footage and you can watch that without me talking over top of it. So you get a bit of a better fight experience, I think. Yeah, so having said all of that, let's jump into it. Now, I can't really talk about this event without talking about the day/night before, because as with all of the robot combat events that I go to, I was still doing work the day before. And in actual fact, Video Game Violence didn't get any electronics jammed into it until the day before. So we jammed the electronics into it, but unfortunately during shipping, one of the sections of the 5-volt regulator in one of the ESCs, because there were 3 ESCs in there, that blew up, and we had, or blew up or fell off, and we had all 3 ESCs plugged into the receiver at the same time, which meant that we had a huge spike go through the 5-volt line and killed 3 out of 4 ESCs that we had for it. Of course, one of those was a spare, but that did mean that we only had 1 ESC to drive an entire robot. So that meant that the day of, there was a little bit of panic in the early morning because we had to get some new ESCs. Luckily, Steve from BotBits runs the whole show, so he was able to get us some ESCs there on the day, which was good because we could solder them up and get them into the robot. And then came also Strange Young Man. Strange Young Man hadn't really moved around too much before the night before, and what I found was that at the low end, the brushless hub motors that I was using were having trouble turning on the spot because the ESCs couldn't work out what position they were in. I also thought that might have been something to do with grip, but I was only running it on 4S as a quick little drive around, and I kind of assumed that 6S would fix the issue. So that brings us on to the morning of and going through scrutineering. So to go through scrutineering, we obviously had to solder up those ESCs, get them working. Then we also jumped Strange Young Man up to 6S. So talking about Strange Young Man first, I put Strange Young Man into the arena and I was still having the same issues. I could drive forwards and backwards, no problem at all, but attempting to turn kind of caused Strange Young Man to stutter on the spot and not really turn as well as I wanted him to, which wasn't good. So I kind of chalk this up to it being an issue with traction and having too much traction from the silicon. Basically, the wheels weren't sliding, which was meaning that the robot was staying stationary rather than actually spinning on the spot, which is, of course, a bad thing. And then we had Video Game Violence with the brand new ESCs. That went into the arena, managed to drive around, managed to spin up the weapon. Unfortunately, we had the link in the wrong spot, and the weapon actually popped the link out of Video Game Violence, which was a bad thing indeed. So with all of that said and done, that was very, very close to the first round of fights, and Strange Young Man was up second, which meant that we had no time to go through and actually do anything with Strange Young Man. We just had to put Strange Young Man back into the arena. I didn't have any time to change the wheels up or anything like that. So we put Strange Young Man back into the arena up against its first opponent, Just Keep Spinning, which was a robot mostly made out of MDF with 2 saw blades. So here you go. This is that fight. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Take it away. Oh, and keep spinning. She's not just spinning any longer. She's jammed in the
What do we do here? Will Death Roll come in and split them up? Or... Oh, yeah, Death Roll! Like a lifeguard in the arena here today, Death Roll can separate the bots to keep them fighting. We don't want to stalemate. It looks like Death Roll's now stuck.
It looks like Steve might be going in.
Oh, we got Judge Steve manually getting in the ring. He's a brave man.
Ladies and gentlemen, this guy has a PhD in robotics.
Inspiration, kids. Have you got steel caps on, Steve? Hey,
Many years of study at work.
Give it up for Death Roll and Steve. Let's keep this battle going.
All right, let's keep spinning.
Let's hear a big round of applause to get him G'd up. Who do we want to win? Strange young man on the move. We need to start with another count back in. You remember the deal? 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Reboot. Oh, spinning all right. One blade looks a little loose there. Oh,
Oh, we've lost the blade.
no! Oh, no! Lucky she bought a spare one. They've got two. She's still attacking. Strange young man doesn't know what to do. He's coming for the flip, and he's missed it. Oh, he flipped himself. Oh, no. I don't know if Bunnings need to upgrade their blades, but the one's still spinning. Can she still take it away into the side of Strange Young Thing? One's on the move, and Strange Young Thing seems to be stationary and want to use his brute force.
Looks like we're getting some floor ripped up there as well.
Death Roll's just casually watching. Hey, that's the judge, Strange Young Thing. You won't win tackling the judge. Keep spinning away in the corner. I really can't tell what's going to go on here. There's not much of an attacker going on, Kate. I feel like the crowd needs to give it a bit of a cheer.
Just keep spinning is just keeping on spinning.
Well, I've just been advised from the judges. Oh!
we've lost
Just
another
keep
blade.
spinning.
Well, to be fair, it is keeping on
He
spinning.
is. Just keep spinning. You want to count down still, Judge? I think she's pretty attack this. It's on its side. Oh! Let's count it down. Let's see if Just Keep Spinning can move. I don't think so, but 10, 9, 8.
So there you go. That was not the greatest fight on my part. The lack of turn there really did show through, and I just kind of got a little bit lucky that I could actually position myself correctly to get in underneath them and throw them up against the wall there at the end. The cut and hold that you saw was because I changed one of the side plates on Strange Young Man from being Lexan to HDPE, and the saw just kind of cut into and stuck in the HDPE, which took quite a while to unstick, as you did see there. So after that fight, even though it was a win, I was very kind of unhappy with the performance of Strange Young Man and these particular hub motors, thinking it was an issue with grip, and that I'd kind of played myself by making silicon wheels for these things. I then ran through and ran tape around all of the wheels. In the front two, I only had thin strips of tape, and in the back two, I had thicker strips of tape, just so that I had less traction on the ground, and that meant that, well, I was hoping that that would mean that I would kind of turn a little bit more easily, but I didn't really have any chance to check that because going straight into round two, we had video game violence up pretty early and then Strange Young Man pretty much soon after that. So video game violence we were relatively confident in. We had moved the link location in the robot, so we thought everything should be fine to power up and get going. So let's have a look at video game violence's first fight.
3, 2, 1, was hot and you came out early, you were straight into it. Let's see if video game violence can move you more countdown in 10, 9, 8, 7.
So that did not go very well. Basically what happened there was I had used some old electronics to get video game violence up and running, and when we'd done the ESCs in the morning, I had literally just cut the plugs off the old ESCs, the dead ESCs, and soldered the wires directly together rather than soldering the plug directly to the new ESC. And what had happened is that the one ESC that we had powering the RC receiver had a dry joint in the connection from the old ESC, which kind of maybe makes sense, but kind of maybe doesn't. But what that means is that the power cut out to the whole bot. One big hit, and the power connector kind of wiggled loose a little bit on that one particular ESC, and the power died to the receiver, which meant that the bot had to be counted out. So that was not a great start for video game violence. Also, I think that fight kind of showed the lack of power that spinners have in a event like this. In the sportsman's class, the spinners have that limit on them, and as far as I know, video game violence is kind of running pretty close to that limit. We'd really need actual proper weapon teeth on this thing for it to do anything, really. I mean, it didn't help that video game violence there was fighting Skeletor, who, if you have seen videos here in the past, has done huge amounts of damage to me and, well, to my robots in particular in past events. It is a terrifying machine and can really do a lot of damage in the sportsman's class. So moving on from video game violence, also in the second round, we had Strange Young Man back up again, this time round versing almost something that would probably work as a Willet bot, to be perfectly honest. This is Serial Killer, which is a clamp bot made out of cereal boxes, very similar to the Crave Monster, but at a 13 kilo scale rather than at the American ant weight scale that the Crave Monster is done at. So as I said before, we've taped the wheels up here on Strange Young Man, and I was hoping for a little bit better performance out of Strange Young Man in terms of maneuverability, but let's see how that went.
2, 1,
So that went okay. I mean, once again, I didn't have all the maneuverability that I wanted in the robot. I did get some decent turns out of it, but basically what this is leading me to believe is that it wasn't actually a traction issue. So the arena by this stage, by kind of halfway through round 2, the arena floor was really dirty, like amazingly dirty. Plus I had all of that tape on the wheels, so traction should have been at probably the lowest it possibly could be, and I still wasn't getting a whole lot of turn out of the robot. So I think this actually comes down to a limitation of brushless ESCs. It's not even the actual hub motors themselves, it's the ESCs that I was using. So I was using tiny little 30 amp Hobby King Afro ESCs, and they are a sensorless ESC. Basically, it means that they have to kind of guess where the motor is and guess which coil to turn on, but they can guess a lot better when the motor is moving really, really quickly, because that's what these ESCs are designed to do. They're designed for quadcopters and things where the motor is going to be spinning at thousands of RPM all the time, no problem about that. So they have code in there that is really, really good at working out where the motor is when it's spinning really fast. When I am trying to spin on the spot, the motors are not spinning very fast at all. So realistically, what I needed to do was change from sensorless ESCs that I was using to censored ESCs. The problem is doing that means going to something like a VESC, which means tripling or quadrupling the cost of my ESCs. It's definitely something I'm going to be looking into because it should make a marked difference on the actual maneuverability of the robot, but it's also quite a hike in price. So that is something to keep in mind if you're planning on using those brushless hub motors that I was in these fights. Then we are now moving directly on into the third set of fights for the day, and this time round it was once again video game violence's turn. So we have completely gone through, redone all of the wiring, I've checked every single joint just to make sure that we can't have another shutdown like that one again. And this time round, video game violence is up against Stingray, which is actually built by the same guy that built Skeletor, so it is a very rugged and robust bot with a quite deadly saw on it. So let's see how that went. So again, not great for video game violence. Video game violence is having a bad run of it at this stage. This one was a link pop out. So this is very rare for my robots because I normally don't rigidly lock my links into place. But what I found was that even though we cable tied the link, the backside of the link into the robot, the actual top plate pressed down on the link enough that when that huge hit happened, the link just popped out and went flying. So there we have video game violence is actually out now for the competition because 2 losses in a row means that it has no chance of getting another fight going into session 4. However, because Strange Young Man got those 2 good lifts in its earlier fights, it has 2 wins, and that means it is getting a fight in session 4, and it's bad news. It is going up against Skeletor, who, as I mentioned earlier in this video, has a good habit of destroying Strange Young Man's head. It is a great show for the crowd, but often my head, or Strange Young Man's head, gets blown to pieces. Last time we faced each other though, Strange Young Man did pull off a judge's decision. However, as we've seen over the course of this video, Strange Young Man is suffering from maneuverability problems right now. So this is going to be an interesting fight.
Strange Young Man really looks struggling to move that lifter. I think he's taking out a few components there today.
Is Strange Young Man's lifter working?
Oh, I don't know. It might be done. Skeletor is being chanted from the crowd. We've got about 40 to go. We can't do a countdown because Strange Young Man's still moving. Although he hasn't got much attack left in him. I think he's barely going to touch the juice, actually. Skeletor, you going to slice and dice, or what's he going to do? Cheer out if you want to slice and dice here. Oh, here we go. One Venusaur. He's got it in the grips of his hands. Is the blade done on Skeletor, though? It looks to be goes. Justice bot. Lost his attack mode, but he still won the fight. Still won the fight. Anything can happen, but I think we might go to a countdown now. We might have to, we're going to a separation, says Judge Steve. Let's pause the clock there. 42 seconds on the clock. Steve's heading into the arena. He used to have death roll to do this, but death rolls rolled over and had a rest for the rest of the afternoon. Give a little kick in the guns there, Skeletor out.
Alright, we're going to count down from 5. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 5 again.
What? There's only 30 seconds left in the fight. I reckon we should hear a lot more from the crowd in a minute. Final questions, big questions. Skeletor, thumbing your head, moving down to the body. Here we go. 20 seconds left on the clock, and Strange Young Man, fight it out. What will we do now?
Strange Young Man is not giving up.
We're gonna have to count it down to the end of the fight is coming in 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Wow, we round of applause for Skeletor and Strange Young Man.
So there you go. That went about as well as I thought it was going to go. The brand new vacuum formed head, which I gotta say looked pretty good, got blown to pieces. Now, I could have probably hot glued all of this back together. However, the lights in the eyes were supposed to have a JST connection back here that connected them down into the robot to power them up, and that got ripped off, and I couldn't find it in the arena anywhere. So this guy was put aside, and of course I bolted on the replacement head that I brought because, let's be honest, I know Skeletor's in the field, and there's a couple of other arm-based saw robots in the field. Like, I didn't fight any of the other ones, obviously, this weekend, just gone, but I knew that they were there, so I always make sure I bring spare heads for Strange Young Man, because this stuff is prone to happen when you've got a head on a combat robot. Yeah, so that meant that Strange Young Man is now also out. So without 3 wins, Strange Young Man is not in the running to win the competition, and that meant that it was time to move on to the Rumble. Now, going into the Rumble, as I said, I bolted on the replacement head, and I also decided to change things up a little bit. I decided to go ahead and bolt the hammer on. I also actually needed to go through and replace the chain because the chain slipped off in the Skeletor fight. So you can see kind of halfway through that fight, I stopped using the arms, and that's literally because, yeah, partway through that fight, it just came off. Now, I'm thinking it's because I'm using a plastic base plate and some things kind of warped a little bit and just the chain went flying inside. So that wasn't great. So I reseated the chain. I kind of did everything I could to kind of tension everything back up again. And then, yeah, put a hammer on to go into the Rumble. Now, going into the Rumble meant that we were going to put Strange Young Man in, but also meant we were putting in video game violence for the final time today. This time round, we made sure we put tape over that link so that we knew for a fact it was not going to die. And now let's take a look at the Rumble, where basically it's a Rumble. It's everybody who is still left at the end of the day, all thrown into the arena at the same time. Just madness.
3, 2, 1, let's get the show on top! This is it!
I don't even know what's happening. Everything's happening.
The Rumble in the jungle! Oh my god! Parts everywhere!
Oh, the bubble has just been smashed.
Yeah!
The bubble's in a couple of pieces. Hello, Max. It's just smacking that poor pony. Hydra's just going nuts in the middle there.
Let's see some noise! Is this what you wanted to see all day? This is Rumble in Brisbane 2018. Give it up for Roll and Go! Oh,
Total whistles. Oh.
this is nuts! Cheer
Oh,
up!
we want pony. Pony's revenge is not getting revenge.
Shout out your favorites! We've got a minute to go. less than a minute. Give us some noise for the final minute. It is crazy. Oh, Steve's yelled stop. Steve's yelled stop.
So that was chaos, and it only ended when it did because the robot that had the unicorn sitting on top of it, which was called Most Ponies Revenge after the awesome video done by William Osman, it was a weird build. It was done out of plywood under that shell, so the entire robot weighed less than 4 kilos, and it managed to fight its way through the day, breaking drives and all sorts of stuff along the way. But partway through that rumble, it lost its battery. Its battery came out the back, and we'd already had one lipo fire during the weekend, and I'll just quickly show you that now because it's really, really cool. So the event organizers did not want another lipo fire and had to call a quick end to the rumble. But Strange Young Man and also Video Game Violence did manage to make it all the way through the rumble. Once again, Strange Young Man's weapon stopped working. I found out afterwards that was because the nut on one of the gear sets inside had come loose, and so the gear was spinning freely, which meant there was no power going to the actual arms. And that does happen. It has happened before, and admittedly, I've been meaning to update Strange Young Man's weapon system for a long time, so this is just kind of going to push me into actually doing that upgrade and updating everything. Video Game Violence did work all the way through the rumble. I am very convinced that it needs actual proper weapon teeth. The weapons seem to do nothing to any of the robots that it actually hit, which is unfortunate, but that is what happens when you're running a spinner in Sportsman's. Yeah, so on the whole, I think Jaden from Raptor Robotics did a good job driving that under the circumstances. The wheels that it had also didn't have a whole lot of grip on them either, so it's probably something I should look at in the future. So, takeaways for me from this event. Always make sure you double check all your electronics before you go. I don't mean spinning weapons up at home, but I do mean at least running your robot around on the kitchen floor, making sure that all of the electronics work. Maybe not even on the kitchen floor, maybe just boost it up off the ground, make sure everything's running and everything's going well. If you are using leftover electronics from another robot, just double check everything and make sure it's all going well. If you are going to use brushless hub motors like these ones that I used in Strange Young Man, don't run them Simon K, because they will not turn. These things have a lot of potential in them, and I'm going to get them to work in a robot at some point. But for now, all I can say about them is don't run them on Simon K. They won't do what you want them to do. That's just the end of that discussion, pretty much. So I have some changes and upgrades I'm going to do to my robots. I don't now know if Video Game Violence is ever going to go back to another competition. Basically because this was a bit of a special case. Jaden from Raptor Robotics was coming over to the event anyway, so Video Game Violence was kind of built for him to fight at the event. And the next event this year is going to be an open national tournament, which means everything will be allowed. So if I take robots over, I'll have an open robot, and I might take a sportsman. But if I take a sportsman, it will be Strange Young Man. It won't be Video Game Violence. So I don't know, maybe Video Game Violence will come back next year, but I would have to do a few upgrades and improvements to it before I would consider actually putting it back in the arena again. And as I said, I would need to have an event where I wanted to take two sportsman robots at the same time, because whenever I go to a sportsman event at the moment, Strange Young Man is always going to be the first thing that I pack into a bag. Yeah, so there you go. That is how things went. It wasn't great, but it was a fun experience on the whole. So I hope you guys have enjoyed that as much as I did on the day, and I will see you in the next video.